In September 1986, a new animated series exploded onto television screens with state-of-the-art animation, a full 65-episode order, and the backing of the same legendary studio that created Thundercats. SilverHawks had everything going for it. The toys were designed, the comics were commissioned, the hype was real. By December of that same year, it was over. The show ended, the cartoon collapsed, and by 1988, it was completely dead. So, what killed SilverHawks? Because here's the thing, it wasn't bad ratings, it wasn't poor quality, and it definitely wasn't lack of potential. The real reason is far more devastating than that. Most people think SilverHawks failed because it couldn't compete. That's wrong. The truth is, it was killed by a single 6-month mistake that destroyed everything, and it was completely avoidable. But before we dive into this story, if you love deep dives into classic cartoon and want to see more content like this, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on future videos. Trust me, you'll want to stick around for this one. Now, here's what really happened. So how did SilverHawks go from having everything lined up perfectly to complete collapse in less than 2 years? To answer that question, we need to go back to the beginning. Back to 1986, back to a time when the toy and television industry was operating under a very specific set of rules. Rules that SilverHawks would eventually break in the worst possible way. But here's what makes this story even more fascinating. SilverHawks shouldn't have even had a chance in the first place. To understand why SilverHawks failed, you first need to understand the world it was born into. The year was 1986, and the toy television industry had become a precision machine. The formula was simple but unforgiving. You needed a cartoon to sell toys, and you needed toys to keep the cartoon alive. One couldn't survive without the other, and the timing between them, it had to be perfect. This wasn't just creative collaboration. This was corporate synergy at its most ruthless. Companies like Hasbro had turned this model into an empire with Transformers and G.I. Joe. Mattel had done the same with He-Man. The game was, launch the show, launch the toys at the exact same time, let them feed off each other's momentum, and watch the money roll in. But here's what made this era even more dangerous. The market was absolutely saturated. By 1986, toy aisles were battlegrounds. He-Man, Transformers, G.I. Joe, Mask, and a dozen other cartoon were all fighting for the same shelf space, the same kids' attention, the same parents' wallets. Breaking into this market wasn't just difficult, it was nearly impossible. And into this absolute war zone walked Rankin Bass Productions with SilverHawks. A space-themed cyborg adventure that needed to somehow carve out territory in the most competitive toy market in history. The odds were already stacked against them, but they had one massive advantage that should have guaranteed success. SilverHawks wasn't some random gamble by an unproven studio. This was Rankin Bass, the same creative powerhouse behind Thundercats, one of the biggest animated hits of the mid-80s. Arthur Rankin Jr. and Jules Bass knew exactly what they were doing. They'd already cracked the code once, and now they were ready to do it again. The concept itself was brilliant. Take the Thundercats formula, the fantasy adventure, the team dynamics, the hero-villain conflicts, but reimagine it for space. Cyborg heroes who were partly metal, partly real, fighting against a cosmic mob led by the menacing Mon Star. It was Thundercats meets sci-fi, with a western edge and even musical elements through the character Bluegrass. This wasn't a lazy reskin, this was genuine innovation. And the production quality? Absolutely top tier. Rankin Bass brought in Pacific Animation Corporation from Japan, the same team that had delivered stunning visuals for Thundercats. The character designs were intricate, the action sequences were dynamic, and the animation had that premium quality that made 80s cartoons so memorable. This was a show that looked expensive because it was expensive. The industry noticed immediately. Distributors were confident enough to order a full 65 episodes up front. That's not a test run. That's a vote of confidence. That's Hollywood saying, we believe in this. The series premiered in September 1986 with legitimate buzz behind it. Then came the merchandising deals. Kenner, one of the biggest toy companies in America, signed on to produce the action figure line. Marvel Comics picked up the property for their Star Comics brand, ensuring that SilverHawks would exist across multiple media platforms. Everything was lining up perfectly. And for those first few months, it actually worked. Kids tuned in, the animation impressed parents, the show found its audience. SilverHawks wasn't just surviving in that brutal market, it was carving out its own identity. The characters resonated. The world building felt fresh. The action was legitimately exciting. This is where most people think the story stays on track. After all, the show was good, the toys were coming, the comics were running. What could possibly go wrong? But before we get to the collapse, you need to understand why SilverHawks mattered to the kids who watched it. Because this wasn't just another action cartoon. There was something emotionally compelling about these characters that goes beyond nostalgia. The core concept hit differently than other shows of that era. These weren't just heroes, they were people who had sacrificed their humanity to protect others. Commander Stargazer, Quicksilver, Bluegrass, Steelheart, Copper Kid, every member of the SilverHawks team had been transformed, augmented with metal parts, changed forever to fight evil in the far reaches of space. There was something genuinely poignant about that sacrifice. And the villains? Mon Star wasn't just another one-dimensional bad guy. He was the head of an organized crime syndicate in space, backed by a crew of bizarre and memorable henchmen. The show had this unique blend of superhero action and crime drama that felt more sophisticated than most cartoons aimed at kids. The music element, brought in through Bluegrass and his guitar, added another layer of personality. The theme song itself was an earworm that embedded itself in your memory. Even today, fans can still sing every word. That's the mark of something that genuinely connected. For kids watching in 1986, SilverHawks represented adventure, heroism, and a sci-fi universe that felt vast and exciting. This wasn't background noise. This was appointment television. This was the show you rushed home to watch, the characters you pretended to be on the playground. And that emotional connection? That's what should have carried the cartoon for years. That's what should have translated into toy sales, comic book readers, and long-term brand loyalty should have. The peak of SilverHawks was brief but undeniable. From September to December 1986, the show dominated its syndicated time slots. It was pulling in the young male demographic that advertisers craved. The animation quality remained consistently high across all 65 episodes. The voice acting, led by industry veterans, brought genuine personality to the characters. Early toy line projections looked strong. Kenner was preparing for a major launch. The Marvel Comics series was expanding the universe, introducing new characters and storylines. There were already discussions about potential second-season scripts. For those 3 months, SilverHawks felt like the next big thing. It had the pedigree, the quality, the audience, and the momentum. Industry insiders were watching closely, expecting Rankin Bass to deliver another Thundercats-level phenomenon. This was the golden age, the moment where everything seemed possible, where the franchise felt unstoppable. But something was happening behind the scenes, something that would shatter everything. While the show was airing to positive reception, there were warning signs that very few people noticed at the time. The toy line, which should have been hitting shelves alongside the show's premiere, wasn't there. Store displays sat empty. Kids were asking their parents for SilverHawks toys that simply didn't exist yet. Industry insiders knew the reason, and it was troubling. LJN Toys, the company that had successfully launched the Thundercats toy line before the cartoon even aired, had passed on SilverHawks at the last minute. This wasn't a minor setback. This was a catastrophic business failure that exposed a critical weakness in the entire franchise strategy. Kenner stepping in should have been good news. They were a major player with serious distribution power. But Kenner coming in late meant production delays. It meant missed marketing windows. It meant a complete disruption of the carefully timed synergy that made these toy cartoon franchises work. And there was another problem lurking beneath the surface. The toy market was getting even more crowded. In early 1987, a new franchise was about to explode onto the scene and change everything: Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. The competition wasn't just staying fierce. It was about to get exponentially worse. The warning signs were there. The timing was already off. The market was shifting. But no one could have predicted just how catastrophic the next 6 months would be. December 1986. The final episode of SilverHawks aired. Episode 65, titled Air Show, brought the first season to a close. And then, nothing. No announcement about Season 2. No reruns scheduled for primetime slots. The show simply ended. This is the moment. This is where the entire franchise began its irreversible collapse. In the toy television business model, shows didn't just end after one season if they were successful. They got renewed, they got expanded, they became multi-year properties. The fact that SilverHawks wasn't immediately picked up for more episodes should have been a massive red flag. But here's what made this moment truly fatal. The SilverHawks toy line was still in production. It wouldn't hit store shelves until mid-1987, 6 months after the show ended. Let that sink in. The cartoon, the thing that was supposed to drive toy sales, was over. Done. Finished. And the toys, the things that were supposed to keep the cartoon profitable and justify a second season, hadn't even launched yet. This was the exact opposite of how the formula was supposed to work. This was the synergy machine running backwards. And once it started running backwards, there was no way to stop the collapse that followed. Once the show ended and the toy delay became apparent, everything started falling apart in sequence. First, syndication deals dried up. Why would networks pay to air reruns of a cartoon with no new episodes and no toys on shelves? The whole point of airing these shows was to drive product sales. Without products to sell, there was no reason to air the show. When the Kenner toy line finally launched in mid-1987, it was already too late. Kids had moved on. The buzz had died. Worse, the show wasn't on TV anymore to remind them why they should care about these characters. The action figures sat on shelves, marked down almost immediately. And the toys themselves had problems. The signature chrome finish, the metallic look that made the SilverHawks visually distinctive, was expensive to produce and prone to wear and tear. Kids playing roughly with the figures would scratch and chip the chrome, making the toys look worn out faster than normal action figures. Parents noticed. Retailers noticed. Kenner's response was telling. They canceled the planned Hawkhaven Fortress playset, the big-ticket item that was supposed to be the centerpiece of the toy line. When a toy company cancels a major playset, it's because they're cutting their losses. It's because they know the line is dying. The second series of toys, released in 1988, was drastically scaled back. Series 1 had launched with 12 figures. Series 2? Only 7. That's not expansion. That's retreat. That's a company trying to squeeze out whatever remaining profit they can before shutting everything down. By late 1988, it was officially over. Kenner cited steeply declining sales and discontinued the entire line. The Marvel Comics series ended that same year. SilverHawks, the property that had seemed so promising just 2 years earlier, was completely dead. And the most frustrating part? The show itself was still good. Fans still loved the characters. The animation still held up. The concept was still strong. None of that mattered. The business execution had failed so completely that creative quality became irrelevant. This is where the SilverHawks story becomes a cautionary tale about the collision between creative vision and corporate reality. Arthur Rankin Jr. and Jules Bass had created something genuinely worthwhile. The writers, animators, and voice actors had delivered quality work across all 65 episodes. The property had real artistic merit, but none of that could save it from a catastrophic business decision that was completely outside their control. When LJN walked away, the entire carefully constructed business model collapsed. Rankin Bass didn't control the toy production. They didn't control the retail distribution. They didn't control the timing. All they could do was watch as the synergy they'd built with Thundercats failed to materialize for SilverHawks. This is the harsh reality of 80s media franchises. Creative success meant nothing without business success. A great show with a failed toy line was just an expensive liability, and there was no world where SilverHawks could survive as just a show. The economics didn't work. The business model required both sides of the equation to function simultaneously. Rankin Bass had done everything right creatively and still lost. That's not failure, that's tragedy. That's watching your work die, not because it wasn't good enough, but because someone else dropped the ball on the business side. And here's the most painful irony. Thundercats continued to thrive throughout this entire period. The franchise that SilverHawks was supposed to complement kept dominating the market. Its toy line kept selling. Its show kept airing. SilverHawks wasn't just competing with other franchises. It was living in the shadow of its own predecessor. forever labeled as Thundercats in Space, instead of earning its own identity. So here's the truth that most people miss about why SilverHawks failed. It wasn't because kids didn't like it. It wasn't because the animation was bad. It wasn't even because the market was too crowded, though that didn't help. SilverHawks failed because of a 6-month timing gap that destroyed the fundamental synergy between media and merchandise. Think about what that gap meant in practical terms. By the time toys hit shelves in mid-1987, the show had been off the air for 6 months. 6 months in kids' entertainment is an eternity. That's enough time for an entire cultural shift. That's enough time for kids to discover new obsessions and forget old ones. The toy television model only worked when both pieces fed into each other simultaneously. Kids watched the show, wanted the toys, bought the toys, played with the toys, which made them watch more episodes, which made them want more toys. It was a loop, a cycle, and it only functioned when both elements were present at the same time. Break that cycle, and the entire franchise collapses, which is exactly what happened. But the timing gap wasn't the only problem. SilverHawks was also fatally overshadowed by Thundercats. Rankin Bass tried to replicate their earlier success too quickly, launching a follow-up while the original was still dominating. Audiences and retailers didn't see SilverHawks as its own thing. They saw it as the new Thundercats, which meant it was always being compared to a franchise that was still in its prime. And finally, there was the market saturation issue. 1986 and 1987 saw the toy industry hit peak competition. Not only were established franchises still strong, but new properties like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were exploding onto the scene. SilverHawks, arriving late with expensive chrome toys and no show to back them up, simply couldn't compete. These 3 factors combined into a perfect storm of failure. Great creative work, destroyed by poor business execution, bad timing, and brutal market conditions. The story of SilverHawks teaches us something that's still relevant today, decades later. Quality alone is never enough. Timing, execution, and market positioning matter just as much, sometimes more than the actual creative work. And if you want more deep dives into the rise and fall of classic franchises, hit that subscribe button. There are plenty more stories like this one, and trust me, they're just as fascinating. Thanks for watching.